My guest today is Tilak Doshi. And Tilak, what's new?
Well, a fair bit since my publication of an article in Forbes in July, which was taken down, and shortly thereafter I was removed as a contributor to Forbes magazine. I've been a contributor there since 2019, so almost over four years of publishing in Forbes. So that was quite an interesting episode.
Yeah, do you want to talk about the details of what happened there? What did you do to make them get rid of you?
Yeah, it's been it's not like completely out of the blue. Since I started writing for them in April 2019, there were occasions when the editors got back to me saying, "Hey, look, can you change this or that because it does not meet our editorial guidelines?" So an early article that got their interest was one that I wrote in 2020 in August on electric vehicles. And that was fairly critical, made the well-known points about how, it really depends on a whole lot of parameter values before you can say that EVs are greener in any logical way. So I made the point that electric vehicles were leading to environmental degradation in poorer countries like Congo, which were required to deliver rare earths and things like lithium and copper and so on. And that article attracted a lot of attention. It was entitled "The Dirty Secrets of Clean Electric Vehicles." It almost got 1 million hits. And I was contacted by the editor who said that, look, you do not meet editorial guidelines. You should avoid advocacy, opinion, polemic, or rumor mongering. Now, they didn't accuse me of rumor mongering because they did not show any place where I was promoting rumors. But this odd point that they made several times during my period with them as a contributor was avoiding advocacy and opinion. And I did ask them, we are not journalists. Contributors to Forbes are people who write about opinion. They are op-ed editors. So, it was very odd, them accusing me of opinion when I'm actually not a paid journalist to report on the news. I'm an opinion contributor. That's what we are. So it very rapidly became apparent that it was the kind of opinions you hold that matter rather than holding an opinion as such. So in that editor's response to my article on the electric vehicles, it was apparent that they had received feedback from their readers, I imagine, and the followers, and they raised two issues. One was that I was a climate denier, which the term has become so common now. And the second follow-on point was that I was a shill for oil companies. Since very few comments ever engage me on content, on a factual statement or a logical argument, it is more like, you work for oil and gas companies, therefore you are a shill writing for oil and gas. And so you should not be listened to. Those were the two comments I got from the editors. And I wrote a full reply basically saying that, look, climate denial is not only an odd statement to make, but it's it's an insulting one, given its very overt link to the so-called Holocaust deniers. And I told him, look, all I'm denying is this belief that climate models can predict the future. If that what makes me a denier, I'm a model denier, not a climate denier. So that was back in August 2020, and I've had editors writing me off and on, sometimes changing the title, changing the lead photograph, sometimes directly so, sometimes asking me to do it. And most of the time, I've managed to sort of meet some of their requirements without compromising what I believe to be were important messages to be delivered in those articles that are published. And then there was some editorial changes, and I got my first sort of response from a new editor, this time about an article on the Biden administration's plans for proclaiming climate emergency. This was sometime in April 2024, this year. And in the news, there was occasion to speculate on whether the Biden administration would in fact actually proclaim a climate emergency. And if they did, obviously they would have got many powers of the executive to push whatever they wanted. In any event, that did not occur, but I wrote an article critical of those plans for obvious reasons. It would have given government too much power to do many things that were, I believe, damaging to the energy security and energy affordability issues. So on that article, they again made references to editorial guidelines. And when you dug deeper into the editorial guidelines, it was again that key phrase that they kept referring me to, which is avoiding advocacy and opinion. That's where matters lay until the article that was published in July, which led to both the article being deleted, what they call unpublished, and then ending my contributor relationship to Forbes. And again, the same thing about me not meeting editorial guidelines and me not avoiding advocacy and opinion. And when I made it clear that there were other writers out there with their own advocacy and opinion that seemed to be fine with them, there was not much response. So there was no appeal required because that was a decision they made and informed me of the decision. So there wasn't a question of whether we needed to talk about it. And so following that, I wrote a repost to the taking my article down and what I thought about them taking my article down. And that article, just to give you a backdrop, was about J.D. Vance, about President Trump naming J.D. Vance as his VP nominee in July. And my article was about the mass media campaign against J.D. Vance as a climate denier. So no sooner was it announced that J.D. Vance would be Trump's running mate, all the knives came out, and all the major mainstream newspaper, the legacy media, came out accusing JD Vance of being a climate denier. And in my article, what I did was to look into Mr. Vance's views on energy and on policy and on environment. And I found myself suggesting that JD Vance was far more aware of the economics and of the physics of energy than his critics were. And so that's where we are. I'm no more a Forbes contributor. I plan to publish elsewhere. But I thought it was worthy of notice that yet another magazine has pursued this climate alarmist campaign to the point where someone like me is deplatformed. And I'm not the only one, nor am I unique. There were some far more popular, far more well-known people like Schellenberger, as well as I believe you know him as well.
Pilkey Jr., right?
Pilkey Jr., that's right. Both of them had issues with Forbes, and they were dropped as well. So it's a sad thing. And the odd thing is this: Steve Forbes, who is a grandson of the founder of the Forbes magazine, and who is editor-in-chief, himself is very much a critic of wind and solar energy, and has come out very, very clearly and forthrightly on some of the issues related to the Biden administration's support, in particular with subsidies and with mandates for wind and solar and electric vehicles. That has led to much damage to the energy security and affordability in the US. So I find it odd that my views are more consonant with the editor-in-chief than with his junior editors in his own staff. But that's where we are. So
you mentioned that there's new hires at Forbes that are young and woke, and maybe they pushed to get rid of people who tell the truth, or what?
Yeah, that is my speculation. I don't know any of these editors personally, but I was aware of the new editor sometime early this year, and there was no reason to believe that they were any more woke or less woke than the previous editor. But I did make a check on one of the editors. He was a New York Times hire. I mean, New York Times is I believe was a great newspaper. I don't believe it is anymore. But whether he's younger and whether he's more woke, I've got no direct, information on that. But certainly that's a speculation that younger people are more inclined to be critical of anything contrarian to the climate alarmist narrative. That's my belief anyway.
Did I hear you correctly that you were an opinion writer and they didn't want opinion from you, or no?
Yeah, that's the oddest part of this all. They kept referring me to editorial guidelines, which it's quite a fulsome set of instructions and so on. Everything from grammar to more substantive issues. And they kept referring me to avoiding advocacy, opinion, polemic, or rumor mongering. And they never did reply to my question about the fact that we are, after all, opinion editors, and they do carry op-eds or what they call contributor pieces, which are essentially op-eds. So I never got to the bottom of that. Evidently, opinion matters when it doesn't agree with what they seem to think is science. So, yeah.
But they did cancel you, but then also they left up an article that said if Trump wins, it's going to be a, quote, bad dream of extreme weather.
That's right. That's right. So, yeah. So the deplatform article, I went through their website to select a few that were on the same areas that I write in. And saying that Trump would lead to bad dreams because he's such a a person who will bring on climate apocalypse, and so that would be a bad dream. That evidently was allowed to remain published.
So it sounds like Steve Forbes himself is not involved in looking at what's actually going on there. Or
Either that, or maybe. I think my situation was fairly well broadcast. It was covered in several places, including, interestingly, by Scott Adams in his podcast. He brought that up. Someone sent a copy of his broadcast to me. So there has been some awareness of what has happened, but whether Steve Forbes himself either was aware of this or not, I suspect he would have been aware. But whether he wants to make an issue out of it, who knows? Maybe, he writes his column and that's about it. I don't know.
okay, did Scott Adams talk about you by name about your issue here?
No, Scott Adams. Yes. Sorry, I thought you were referring to Forbes. Scott Adams did refer to my case, mention me, and that was his podcast on 28th of July. And he made exactly the same point. He says, is this because they're objecting to opinion? Surely not, because they support wholesomely the opinion that we've got all reasons to be climate alarmist and we should do everything possible to stop fossil fuels and so on and so forth. So Scott clearly made the point that, it is apparent that they unpublished me and discontinued my contributorship, obviously for the opinion that I held rather than the fact that I held an opinion.
How much of this, if any, is motivated by number of views? Because your EV article had nearly 1 million reads. I wonder how about the Trump bad dream, how many views that would get?
Yeah. The EV article was quite extraordinary. It almost hit the 1 million mark. But most of my articles, if you compare them to other contributors, stood up very well. I believe significantly more popular than the median. So I had good readership, and these numbers can be seen by anyone who has an interest. You just look up Forbes and under the contributor's name, and you get all the articles by the contributor with the number of times that article has been read. And you can see that I certainly was one of the better read contributors.
Okay. Which other magazines have not gone woke? Like somebody was saying maybe Newsweek is not so bad, or they're allowing some reasonable things to be published.
Yeah, Newsweek, they're quite interesting. Newsweek, they've come out with people that would not normally get published. Now that you mention it, but that's few and far between. But certainly, almost it's hard to think of popular mass media that holds contrarian views. I mean, let's look at, for example, Wall Street Journal. Wall Street Journal have got some writers who write opinion pieces there. For example, Schellenberger. Now, so he writes pieces there, but if you read other pieces by journalists, for example, then you might see pieces that are very much in line with the mainstream climate narrative. So to answer your question, there are not that many magazines out there that are not clearly in the alternative media. So if you looked at the alternative media magazines like Reason magazine, and then there are websites like What's Up With That, WATTS, What's Up With That. So there are some very good websites and few magazines that are clearly in the alternative space that publish contrarian views and critical views on climate.
Do you think that maybe Substack is going to be the way to go, where you can write whatever you want without an editor?
Yeah, Substack has become very popular. In fact, the couple of people that I mentioned who have since parted company with Forbes as contributors, they have got their own Substacks, and yes, Substack is certainly a phenomenon. I think that's going to play an important role in a range of issues, not just on climate, but on a range of issues that is not being well covered or sympathetically covered by the mainstream media. So yeah, Substack is a good option, I would think.
Have you turned on paid subscribers to your Substack yet?
Not yet. I have held off on that because I'm very, what's the word? I'm hesitant before I commit myself to having at least a volume of writing available, at least a couple of times a week, so that people have got a steady stream of written material that they can expect from me. As of now, I'm still a bit too sparse in my writing. So sometimes I write more profusely, and sometimes I'm off the grid for a couple of weeks and so on. And I don't want that to be the case. If I do commit myself to Substack, I've got a Substack site which I haven't turned on for paid subscribers until I'm able to assure my potential clients that they will get regular writing from me.
Okay, and remind me, what is your biggest interest here? Is it about the energy portion of what's going on worldwide, rather than is the climate a smaller part of that for you?
Okay, so just a capsule summary of my background. I'm an economist. I did natural resource and in particular oil and gas. And most of my career have been in oil and gas companies or in think tanks devoted to energy issues. So my interests have been in a narrow focus, ranging from fossil fuels, oil, gas, and coal, to renewable fuels and so on. And once you start talking of energy, of course, geopolitics and policy come in very strongly, and climate is a major factor in all energy issues. So I'm not a climate scientist. I'm an economist, but I certainly am aware of the link between energy or the lack of links between energy, climate, and of course, policy being the issue that connects the two areas.
Okay. And do you have any summary conclusions about what you think is going to happen with oil and gas over the next, let's say, 10 or 20 years?
I think those conclusions are fairly well known by most people who are not in the climate alarmist camp. So including the EIA, the U.S. Department of Energy's own information administration agency, there is little doubt that oil and gas and coal, for that matter, will be required for the coming decades. So, for example, Exxon does not see a drop-off, any kind of substantive drop-off in fossil fuel use till 2050. OPEC has got the same views. Now, the IEA, which is the OECD, the global energy watchdog for the OECD countries, they are far more compromised, or I believe are far more compromised in their views, because their clients are the countries of the EU and the OECD, and their great sort of emphasis on climate and on promoting renewable energy has got to the point where their predictions and their long-term forecast are not very credible in the industry anymore. So that's the IEA, the Paris-based agency. The EIA, I think, is a little bit more reliable in their long-term forecast. OPEC, of course, one might argue that because they represent the countries producing oil and gas, that they will have their own biases, and I'm sure they're right. But in terms of the industry, there is little debate about the fact that fossil fuels are here to stay, at least over the next several decades. On the one hand, and on the other hand, renewable energy, the news just keeps getting more and more dire. Wind and solar industries are increasingly under pressure, underperforming, and electric vehicle companies, in particular, the companies that are purely producing nothing but electric vehicles and not gasoline vehicles, they are all in a very sad state of affairs. The market isn't developing as they presumed it would. In the EU, in the UK, in the US, EVs are becoming less and less popular. And there is increasing constraints on the amount of subsidies that governments can carry on pushing into this renewable energy. So on both sides, if you look at it, fossil fuels are there. The developing countries that are accounting for most of the growth in economic growth as well as in energy demand growth, they are carrying on as required to promote fossil fuels for the betterment of their citizens. And on the other hand, the news on renewable energies and on electric vehicles, on battery technology and so on hydrogen is almost without any exception negative. They're not doing well. The outlook doesn't look great. And without continued government support, both in terms of finance and in terms of policy mandates, it's hard to see renewable energy taking up a lot of our energy demands anytime in the future, very early in the future. It's a long way away.
So you may have already kind of answered this, but how far away are we from having a U.S. where, for the typical household, their primary vehicle is a pure electrical vehicle. Is it
Yeah,
how far away?
I don't think it's even within sight, frankly. Yeah, partly for a number of well-known reasons. They've been very well covered in the literature. Just the sheer mining requirements, assuming that people want to drive EVs, the sheer mining requirements are so overwhelming for everything from copper to steel to the rare earths for the batteries and so on. That's on the one hand. The capacity and the constraints on batteries are such that it's hard to depend on electric vehicles for long distance travel and to be very confident that there'll be a station nearby where you can immediately charge very quickly and get out. There are just not enough charges and so on. So I'm very skeptical and I'm very pessimistic regarding electric vehicles and, for that matter, renewable energy, so-called renewable energy, because once you start questioning just what is renewable, the amount of material that goes into building those windmills, the concrete, the steel, the rare earths, and so on. It's very hard to argue that those are renewables. They in fact seem to be unrenewable. I mean, if you forget about China and what China is doing, because China is the one that's monopolizing almost 70-80% of the production chain, of the supply chain for wind and for solar, as well as for electric vehicle batteries. So yeah, if you put away China from the picture, then you're not aware and these things appear on the streets and you say, hey, look, we've got new technology, but few people are aware of the fact that China uses coal power in order to produce, components and parts for so-called renewable energy. There's so many things that one needs to be aware of in terms of language, just the sheer language. And that's where I think this started from, right? We started talking about climate denier, the term climate denier. As we were told in 1984 by Orwell, that it's the language that is the ultimate authority of the of an authoritarian state. When your very language that you use starts affecting the way you think about certain things, that itself is a problem, and that needs to be resolved before one can, sort of speak about these things as they need to be spoken about in logical, open terms, rather than in terms of implicit meanings and code words that give rise to certain meanings, but that are completely devoid of true content and factual data.
So looking into your crystal ball again, how close do you think we are to doubling the energy density of batteries? I don't even know how much improvement we've got in the last 10 years. I don't know what the trajectory is.
Yeah, the trajectory has been pretty impressive, but like all learning curves, they start petering out. That's one. And number two, the work of Mark Mills is excellent. He's done some excellent work, including an article he wrote just a couple of years ago, if I'm not mistaken, called Magical Thinking. And at the end, you can't continually see learning curves going in a straight line. They start petering out. And you come across certain thresholds set by physics And those thresholds cannot be crossed. They are the laws of physics. Certainly, batteries have got their limitations in some very clear physical limits. And it's hard to see that batteries, given their very low efficiency in terms of density, it's hard to see batteries playing a major role in a foreseeable future. Now, sure, one cannot deny technology goes by leaps and bounds in unexpected manner, and certainly we can expect to see all kinds of scientific surprises and so on. But you cannot depend on them. You cannot bank on them. But for example, one of the most exciting areas, and that's taking very long to even now as you speak, there are quite a few questions about it, but modular reactors, small modular reactors, nuclear reactors, they seem to be a very promising route. After all, if you can nuclearize a submarine or an aircraft carrier, there's no reason why you can't have a little modular reactor for a limited amount of use at the local level. So let's see, but there are promising areas of technology, and there's no reason why we should have a pessimistic view. I would say that we should have a realistic view and allow 1,000 flowers to bloom. Let research take place in an unconstrained manner without government bureaucrats telling us where research dollars should be put.
So how close do you think we are to running out of hydrocarbons that we can find in the earth? Or do you think we'll be making liquid fuels with nuclear reactors at some point?
That Malthusian syndrome has been with us for several hundred years already, a couple of hundred years already, since the time of Malthus. As far as oil, gas, and coal are concerned, physical constraints on their utter supply availability, they are not an issue right now. There's plenty of oil and gas and coal out there that physical constraints don't really come up as an issue now. The real issue that comes up are policy issues. Are governments investing enough to ensure a reliable supply of oil and gas and coal? And certainly the governments outside of the collective West, outside of the EU and the US, they certainly don't need any kind of encouragement to look for oil and gas, because those are valuable commodities, and governments, if they can get them, would want more of it. So I personally, and I believe most commentators who are aware of energy issues do not lose sleep over running out of resources. They may, as we, and we've seen that over history. We started drilling for oil under the sea in the Gulf of Mexico, which is pretty deep there. So we are capable of doing that, and there are plenty of areas that are under developed or under researched with respect to their potential for oil, gas, and coal supply.
What are your thoughts on the number of acres in the U.S. that are covered right now with wind facilities and solar facilities? Are there going to be way more of them in 20 years, or some are going to be rusting in place? Are they all going to be maintained, or what do you think?
Well, they've got a life expectancy, or at least a presumed life expectancy of about 20, 25 years for solar, and if I'm not mistaken, for wind as well. Don't quote me on wind, but certainly solar, 20, 25 years, and they degrade over time as well. Yeah, we are already seeing a lot of burial graveyards of solar and wind materials, none of them being reused and so on. They're just being dumped in landfills. And there is some legitimate issue about how these things can leach into the groundwater if not taken care of. So these are early days yet, but we are going to see a lot of that. There are memes and pictures out there of this really awful graveyards of stacks of windmill components, those long arms and so on, and on destroyed solar modules being just left to rot or just left in landfill. So that is an issue. Now, looking forward, we are seeing an increasing amount of pushback at the grassroots level by communities, villages, small towns that have got this hideous windmills around them, or plans for covering acres and acres of agricultural land, perfectly good agricultural land with solar farms. In the UK, the latest after the Labour government victory was the Secretary of Energy, Ed Miliband, has stated that they will reduce the amount, reduce the possibilities of local communities being able to block inland windmills. So that's an area of concern, and one sees a fair amount of reaction from local communities and rural settlements against this. And I suspect we'll see more and more of that because it affects land values. It affects the physical beauty of places and so on. So let's see. Let's hope we don't have Germany destroying old Teutonic forests for windmills like they have been doing. And we see, interestingly, that the environmental movement being splintering between the traditional environmentalists for whom the environment meant birds and trees versus the new environmentalists for whom it means wind and solar farms, So you see this sort of a splitting or a moving apart from each other's positions with regard to what exactly one means by good, environment. So let's hope at the local level, governments are increasingly met with opposition so that they don't push these things too fast and too far.
All right. Any other points you'd like to make before we finish this one up?
No, I just believe that we should keep up our debates, particularly on the use of language and how language is becoming or has become distorted, such that talking about climate and talking about energy becomes such a difficult exercise because the language itself holds so many implicit meanings that need to be debated and uncovered before progress can take place. So let's hope your fine work that you do, Tom, on your podcast and on your recordings promote this kind of discussion.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm hoping that you are one of the last persons to get canceled from a mainstream outlet for this. Maybe that's the case.
Well, if that is the case, I'm happy to be the guinea pig.
All right. Thank you very much. Tilak Doshi, thanks. Talk to you next time. Goodbye.
Thank you, Tom. Bye-bye.